All right, everybody. I think we are good to go ahead and get started. First, just want to say thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday to join us for our September Product Tank Richmond event, and welcome to Product Tank Richmond. Before we get started, just a couple of things. First, we wanted to share that this event is being recorded. Just for any of the product people that unfortunately couldn't make it to the 4 o'clock time, we want to make sure that this can live on after today. So we'll be sending this out via email. And for those of us who are hanging out on camera, welcome again, and we're excited to get started. Just before we jump in, we wanted to share just a little bit more about Product Tank Richmond and Mind the Product. Us at Product Tank Richmond, we are just a small piece of one of the world's largest product communities. And we really take the best of Mind the Product, conferences, emails, resources, job opportunities, Slack, and facilitate that into meetups and events. And we are really about bringing together the product community of Richmond and beyond and sharing experiences. And the way that this is done is through the small but mighty team of co-organizers for Product Tank Richmond. We all come from different places of product, and we're super excited to do all of this for you guys. We're bringing the best of the people, the best content of Product Tank Richmond to you guys. So we ask for your feedback at the same time. There'll be a small survey at the end of this event so we can hear from you guys on how to make Product Tank Richmond the best resource for product that it can be. And if you're not on our email list, make sure you also fill out that survey so we can send you our wrap up that we do after each and every event, sharing all the great details and links. So watch out for that in your inbox. And if you're with us today, we'd love to see you next month too for our Product Tank October event. From 12 to 1, we'll be talking all about humans, AI, and banking with Ken of Capital One. And sponsored by Capital One, we can't wait to jump into conversational AI products. Join us if you can. If anybody's looking for a career in product too, now is the time. Product recruiting is spiking like crazy, and we've seen all over Richmond and beyond that everyone is looking for the best of products. So we wanted to share these resources, but if any other, feel free to add those in the chat as well. And we heard you last month too during our Ashley Cheval event when we talked about product U and professional development and product. We consolidated all the books that were put together into this long Excel list just of all the books you guys recommended. So if you're ever looking for a great new product read, we've put them all here. I believe we'll put this in the chat as well. And before we jump in, we're going to be talking a lot about communication and code and really how all these things go together. So we thought we'd start with a small icebreaker. This icebreaker for us, Austin threw this in our Slack chat a couple of weeks ago, and we thought we'd bring it back up. But what is your favorite software product this month, and why is it your favorite product? I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say. Ooh, Monday's a good one. Ooh, really good answers. Trello, I know Miro's a favorite one of mine too. Oh, yep, Trello. iOS, for anybody that's done the new iOS update, yep. Passwords, yeah. These are great. Feel free to keep throwing these in, but we'd say we're going to go ahead and get started. And so as I turn this over to Scott, super excited to introduce him, super excited for this event. It's my pleasure to turn this over to Scott Ford, who is the co-founder and CEO of Richmond's very own Corgibytes. Scott, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having me. Give me just a minute to get my slides up. Is that coming through?
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for having me. Right off the bat, I'd like to kind of ask a quick question. So I'm curious, who here has ever worked with a romantic partner or thought about working with a romantic partner? Awesome. So there are some people in the room who have done this. And so a lot of what I'm talking about today is kind of born out of kind of what my wife and I, Andrea, learned through working together. And a lot of the slides that you'll see here were the product of collaborating with Andrea. So even though she's not here presenting with me, like she's definitely here in spirit. And so just wanted to, you know, kind of quickly acknowledge all of her contributions and everything that we're about to go over. So when I was in high school, there was this girl and she didn't really have a seat at the lunchroom. She had a circuit. So I sat in the same place every week. She flitted from table to table. Every day she would sit down across from me and she would steal my French fries. Like she would sit down and she'd say, "Hey, can I have a fry?" And she just popped one in her mouth and it like annoyed the crap out of me. But in those interactions, we would talk about technology and like even at a relatively young age, we were making connections about, you know, different ways that technology, you know, could really change the world. And it was really interesting that, you know, while we were friends in high school, we never dated. But then a decade or so later, I decided to start my own company because I didn't want to work for anybody else. And I named it after, I had a Corgi, it was a dog, and I wanted it to be like somewhat tangentially related to computers. So I stuck, you know, Bytes as a pun in the name, and she bit me once. So it was, you know, that kind of worked. But, you know, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really wasn't making any money, and was trying to work on it for a year. I had built like 2 small products that nobody seemed to want to buy. And I kept digging deeper into why and discovered that I needed some marketing help. This was my first logo. And I think it's a great exercise in how effort is not the same thing as effectiveness. So while I put a lot of work into this and I was really proud of it at the time, it's ugly. And it is just an awful logo. But this was the first Corgibytes logo. So I kept digging around looking for marketing help. Like now that I knew that, okay, marketing is what I was really struggling with, I needed marketing help. I came across this blogger who was writing about really neat things about marketing and how to, you know, imbue a personalized voice into marketing and make your written communication sound really personable, and especially from like the perspective of an app, making your app sound like it, you know, has a personality. And, you know, looking a little at that photo, like, wow, she looks really familiar. And, you know, I just, you know, really wanted to dive in and learn more about like, you know, what she'd been up to, but was trying to figure out how to make that work. So then I thought, aha, I've got this invite to my high school reunion. So I should go and like as an icebreaker, you know, we can talk about business and reconnect and see what's been going on in her world in the last 10 years. And, you know, we met by a pool the next day and talked about communications, and Andrea shared like her track record as a sales superstar and case studies that were focused on technology. And the great just kind of mismatch of what Andrea was doing and how she had kind of like built a sales engine using a CRM tool. But like, you know, the more and more she talked about it, I was like, wow, like you were building a software product out of your CRM tool. Like, I think you could be a developer if you wanted to. And she's like, no, there's no way I could be a software developer. Anyway, so I shared with her everything that I'd built so far. And she looked at it and was like, well, you don't really have a good sense of who your audience is. With the things you've built, they're not going to sell, unfortunately. But with your skills and with the market, you could open up a consulting company and you could use that consulting to help you learn more about your clients. And then once you know more about your clients, and you can start to build products for them. And she just rattled off like all of this stuff. And it sounded, and then she finished with like, it's so easy, anybody can do it. And it was like, it did not sound easy. It did not sound easy at all. So I instantly wanted to hire her, but I couldn't. I didn't have any money. I had no funds to hire. The only thing I had was equity in, what was, next to nothing. And so I offered her 51%. And my rationale was I'd rather have 49% of something than 100% of nothing. And so that was kind of the idea, was that like, I really wanted her to kind of, come on board. And I had been looking for a co-founder for a while, and had this, had a story shared with me that if you can't find someone to work with you on a product idea, then you're not going to, like, if you can't at least sell that one person to join your team, it's going to be really, really hard to sell a client, sell a customer one day. And so like that really got me thinking that like, okay, I need to find somebody who can be a good complement to me and really kind of balance me out. I was very technically focused. I had a lot of trouble, figuring out what my market needed. I finally figured out that I had a marketing problem. So after thinking about it for a little bit, she said yes, which was, I was over the moon about. I was really excited. And so we dove in and we started working together, and we started iterating on the business and, coming up with new ideas. And after working together for a little while, I went ahead and asked another question, and she said yes to that too. So as I hinted at the beginning, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been an amazing experience to grow together, to really learn what it's like in each other's world. I've learned a lot about marketing and communication over the years. Andrea's learned a lot about software development. We've both learned a lot about each other, but it is hard work. It is really tough work kind of bridging these two worlds between kind of the way a typical marketer thinks and the way a typical software developer thinks. And I think that there were many times that had we not like stuck in and dug into it, like hadn't our relationship, personal relationship, not held us together, like the business might have collapsed. Just because like it was so hard working together sometimes. Like there would be times when like, I would have an idea and Andrea have a completely opposite idea, and we would like argue about it for hours and hours and hours. We would finally compromise on it, and the compromise was amazing, much better than either of our initial ideas were. And so we noticed that we had that, but we really wanted it to be preserved long term, and we wanted it to be successful and stay successful, and not be the thing where like our marriage would make the business fall apart, or the business would make the marriage fall apart. We didn't want that to happen to either. So we went to couples counseling. And the tips and techniques that we learned in couples counseling have been transformative, because we noticed that like the things that we learned by having to learn how to communicate with each other, like it worked all across the business. Like we were able to use a lot of these techniques with our staff. We were able to use them with clients. And, so what I've put together today are 6 frameworks that kind of capture what we've learned. And my hope is that these, some of these 6 frameworks will help you kind of bridge the gap with someone who may think very differently from you. If you're on a product team and you're working with a software developer, it may help you kind of bridge that gap and bridge that divide. Or if you're a software developer and you're frustrated with a product person or a marketing person or a salesperson, it may also help you bridge that divide. So that's kind of the intro, and I'm getting ready to dive into the frameworks. But first, another quick question. Who here has ever been told that they sound like a jerk or worse? Because I've been told that I sound like worse from time to time. Okay, yeah. So not a surprise. So this first communication framework is for those of you who said you struggle with it. So, and it's I statements. And the goal of I statements is to just phrase things from your perspective, from your point of view, because your feelings and your perspective and your rationale, those can't be, those are always true. Those are always true for you. So how you're feeling, like, I'm feeling sad today. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm angry. Or I get angry when you don't respond to my emails. I get angry when you, I don't know. I drew a blank, but you kind of get the idea. And the goal is to keep you from sounding like a jackass. And it's really helpful and can really help kind of turn things around and make it so that the way you're communicating is from your perspective and not from somebody else's perspective. The opposite would be, you ignored my email and now I'm frustrated, right? Like, that's kind of the counterexample. But you're assuming a lot about that, right? You're assuming that they ignored your email. And that's something that can, like, get that other person really upset, and they can be like, well, I didn't ignore your email. I didn't see it, or it went to spam, or like, there's many other things that could have happened, but your frustration is still real and your frustration is still valid. And it's still important for you to communicate that. So if you do it from your perspective and not from an accusatory perspective, then that's going to land much, much better. So the general framework is, I feel frustrated when you, whatever they've done, because, and then the thing that they've done. So I feel frustrated when you ignore my emails because I think you're telling me that I'm not important, right? And this is one of those things that when you're first doing it, it feels formulaic and it feels stupid. And like, it's true of a lot of the frameworks that we're going to mention here. And that was true of couples counseling in general. And we're in couples counseling again, just because we found it so useful the first time. So a lot of these things, like, yes, they feel weird, but if you stick with it and you stick to the framework, it starts to become more natural later. And you'll start to notice when other people do this as well. And you might have a family member who, like, always talked in the form of, like, you frustrate me so much, right? And you learned that habit, and that's how you talk now. And that can be, causing tension with your colleagues if you do that. This framework helps a lot when you're giving feedback to people also. So, like, if you're giving feedback to, especially a creative person. So if there's, like, a creative, like, if you're working with a creative director or a designer and you're giving them feedback on their work, you can say, I feel like this isn't the right approach for these reasons. And again, it's about your feelings, and you're not, like, telling them what they should do. You'd be like, that's the wrong color. So here's an example of, like, that in code review. So, before I learned this framework, I would often write code review statements that would look like this, where it'd be like, you need to make this a method. And it was very much a command, a dictate, not a conversation, not an invitation to collaborate, but it was more of a, I'm telling you that you're wrong, and you need to be better. And again, like, this is attacking the individual instead of attacking the work. That's another thing that I've learned over the years, is that when you are giving feedback and critique, like, it's important to critique the work and not the individual. Whereas, like, this counterexample, like, this is critiquing the individual. So here's a better way to say the same thing is, like, I'm communicating the same information, but I'm also communicating that I'm open to having a conversation about it. I'm communicating, like, that this is my opinion. I'm communicating that, this is about the work and it's not about the individual. And so, those are all really important things to keep in mind when you're helping somebody with their work. So the next communication framework is simply listen, verify, and validate. And this is from a very strict kind of communication style that we learned. This was, like, one of the first things we learned in couples counseling, was how to have a conversation about something that's really heavy. And so first up is kind of listening. And so this is active listening. This is, like, engaging all of your brain and really listening. You don't interrupt the other person. You go one at a time. So one person is listening, the other person is talking, and you don't interrupt. And the job of the person who's listening is to put their feelings aside, and they'll get a turn later. Like you'll get a turn to say what you want to say later. So if you have something that frustrates you, maybe like keep a notepad by you and jot it down. But your goal is to just listen to this other person, not interrupt. And then after each phrase that they say, like they'll get, usually when somebody is telling you how they feel, and they're telling you their perspective, they're sharing their frustrations. After every phrase, repeat back what you've heard, and it doesn't need to be verbatim, but just restate what you heard, and then ask them, like probe them, is there anything else? And you keep doing that until they've run out of steam. Like they don't have anything else to share. They feel like they've gotten everything off their chest. Whoops, sorry. And then you summarize. And you validate their feelings, and like you really focus on the feelings that you heard, and use some empathy and try to imagine yourself in their perspective, and imagine how you would react if all of the things that you heard were true for you. Right now, there might be some things that you heard that you disagree with. You took notes for those, and when you get your turn, you can bring those up. Right? That like if somebody says something happened, and if the person you're talking to says that something bad happened, like you didn't pick me up on time, could be an example. So it'd be like, oh, I've got a really good reason for that, right? But you don't interrupt with that. You can like jot a note down for that later, and then you get to share that on your turn. But again, like recognize that if that person didn't have that context, that it might have been frustrating and upsetting for them. So again, this is a really good framework to use when things feel really heavy, when things feel unresolved, when you're really wondering if like almost like you can sense tension between you and a coworker or you and a colleague. This is a great framework to lean on. And again, this is another one that feels really formulaic at first, and it feels really silly and really stupid. I think the first, 20 times that Andrea and I ran through this, it felt like I felt like a robot following a script, but it was very helpful. And something that I found that was, something that I found really surprising about it was that the value of this appears to not be the sharing part. It's the feeling like you've been heard. Like at the end of this, you feel like you were listened to, you feel like you were heard. And that's really powerful. It's really powerful to have a frustration, share it, and then feel like you were genuinely heard and understood. Even if nothing changes, like you're at least understood. And that's a big deal. So next up is shame versus guilt. And this is inspired by the work of Dr. BRENÉ Brown. Most of it from her, the work from The Power of Vulnerability. Dr. Brown's work is all over the place. She's, if you haven't come across her yet, I encourage you to take a look at some of her books. Like, we've read a lot of them, and they've really informed the culture that we have at Corgibytes. And specifically her work on shame and vulnerability and guilt is what I'll be talking about here. And that was the real focus of The Power of Vulnerability, was her look at the difference between shame and the difference between guilt. And so this is something that you can help your coworkers and your colleagues and yourself not fall into this trap. So shame is a statement about like you not being good enough. Like, I'm not good enough. I'll never learn how to be a marketer / coder. I'll never learn how to be good at product. I'll never learn how to get that. I'll never be able to get that promotion because I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. Whereas guilt kind of looks at the same situation, the same scenario, and thinks of it more as like, this is a skill that I can learn, and I'm frustrated about it, but I can learn it. And kind of recognizing that it's not a defect in you that's making the situation hard, and that it is something that you can overcome. shame is like very deep and pervasive in our society. And this is something that like really comes through with Dr. Brown's work. We will often shame other people when we, when we try to motivate them. So like there are different forms of motivation that are based on shame. And again, like if you're trying to correct somebody else's behavior, try not to lean on tactics that use shame. Like try not to tell the person that they're not good enough. Again, this is like attacking the individual instead of attacking the behavior, but instead say like, that could have been done better. Right. And again, like in one instance, you're invoking a guilt response or a shame response. And the other, you're invoking a guilt response. And you, as often as you can, you really want to try and lean on the guilt response. And this really good quote from Dr. Brown, the shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. And whether it's self-directed, like, it's you saying a shameful statement about yourself, again, kind of like a self-deprecating way, even in humor, if you hear somebody saying this, like it's often still cutting. So it's, it's still helpful to call it out when you see it. And, whereas, guilt can be transformative, and guilt is something that we can guilt is kind of illuminating something about ourselves that we can overcome, or a situation that we can overcome. Blame shows up a lot of places. Blame is like when we take that shame and we direct it at somebody else. And it has an inverse relationship on accountability. So like if you find yourself blaming people all the time, it's because like, you're almost trying to shift accountability. And one place this shows up a lot in software is, looking at a chunk of code and like, who wrote this piece of crap? Like this code's awful. It never should have been written this way. What idiot wrote this? And there's a tool in source control, where you can use to find out exactly who did it. And it's called git blame, to find out who you can blame for the chunk of code. And the number of times that I've had this knee-jerk reaction of like, what idiot wrote this? And then I've gone and looked and, oh, that idiot was me. So like, again, like, but so, so shifting that blame and directing that blame towards others, really kind of take a step and take a beat and wonder like, could I, is it possible that I would have done that had I been in that situation? So the next communication framework is yes and. And the metaphor that Andrea and I use for this is that of shattering glass. And there will be many of you who will likely be shocked about how often you do this, and I'll be asking in just a minute how many of you fall into this trap. But there was a show, How I Met Your Mother, that aired a while back. And one of the characters in there, Ted, in one of the episodes was told very bluntly by his friends that every time they tried to say something, he would say, well, actually, and he would correct them. And he thought he was being helpful. He thought he was trying to teach them something, and he thought he was, trying to correct, misinformation on their part. But they all saw it as like really annoying, and that like, he was being ridiculous, and he didn't trust them to know what they were talking about. And so I'm curious, like, how many people see themselves in that? Like, I see myself in that. This is something that I struggle with a lot, even to this day. Okay. so this will help. And so the antidote to, well, actually, is yes and. And the reason that I totally blanked on the actress whose book this is. It's Bossy Pants. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed.
It's Tina Fey.
Tina Fey.
Thank you, Tina Fey.
When someone chimed in.
Thank you. So Tina Fey, in her book Bossy Pants, has a really, really good discussion about the rules of improv. And the rules of improv are a great way to help people who find themselves in the yes and trap get out of it. And again, this is another one of those frameworks that like, it's going to feel silly for you all actually people who like, you're genuinely trying to help. Like, no, you're wrong. Like, that's not how it actually is. Like, and I need to correct you. So the first rule of improv is, if you fall in that bucket, is the hardest. It's to say yes. And it's to find a way to say yes. It's like, yes, I can see how you got there. Or yes, I understand that a lot of people have that conception. Or yes, that is a way a lot of people use the word, but it's, and then you may find yourself wanting to say, but, like I almost said, but there, but you want to add and, because and is a connecting word that joins two ideas together collaboratively, whereas but tends to shut a conversation down. But is used to refute what just came before it. And so this is one of the big things for improv, is when you're reacting to what someone else has done, you don't have the character that you're playing react in a way to refute what they've said. You find a way to build on top of what they said. So even when you disagree with a colleague or disagree with a coworker, find a way to layer on top of it so you can kind of get to a more correct answer, or kind of informing them. And you make sure you make statements and don't ask questions. So it's like, yes, and I see how you got there. Have you ever thought of it this way? Like, that can flip things around, and it can make it somebody kind of feel on the defensive. Whereas instead, if you can say, yes, I see how you got there, and I've heard that this other approach works as well, then that's inviting more collaboration, and they can yes and on top of what you've said. And what you end up with are happy accidents. And that's the goal, is to like take your starting point and the other person's starting point and really build on it. And you almost always come to a better finish line than you did before. There's so many things within the business at Corgibytes that were a product of Andrea and I like really diving in and saying, choosing to say yes and when we disagreed with each other. So like, our core values, for example, there are many of our core values that I was like, my initial reaction was like, oh, that's not going to work. So instead I decided to lean into it and figure out like, okay, how can I layer a new idea on top of that to make it better? And, Andrea saw where I was going with it, and she layered another idea on top of that. And where we got to was awesome. Like, I'm really proud of our core values, for example. And I don't think we would have gotten there had I just shut it down and said, well, actually that'll never work. Or, been really, really snide or snippy. So yeah, so that's that framework. So improv can help a bunch. So another quick question, who struggles with giving feedback? Yeah. This is another one where I see myself, like I really struggle with giving feedback. Awesome. So this might not be a surprise. I saw this book in the list of recommended reading, like when you all are working on putting together a book club. I definitely recommend Scott's Radical Candor. The framework that she presents in that is, kind of the next communication framework that I want to talk about. Scott used to run the AdWords team at Google, and her boss was Sheryl Sandberg at the time. And she was in a meeting with Sheryl and another senior VP, and Kim there was like a conversational tick that Kim had, where she said, I think it was just like she said a lot, like a lot. I say a lot too, and it's something that I struggle with and I'm working on. And Cheryl pulled her aside after the meeting and said, "Hey, do you notice like how many times you used the word in that conversation?" And Kim's response was, "Yeah, I know. I'm working on it. It's no big deal." And Cheryl said, I know you're working on it. That's great. And I have seen you get better. However, you sound stupid. You sound like you don't know what you're talking about. And Kim said that was a really transformative moment for her because she instantly knew that Cheryl cared about her as an individual and really wanted to help her, but had chosen to be very direct. And that's kind of the idea behind radical candor, is being very direct while also caring. And so Kim takes these two ideas and explores them as an axis, because that's just fun to do in the business world, is to take two ideas and quadrant them out. So she calls the challenge directly access the willingness to piss you off. So like I am willing to make you angry for your own benefit, is on the strong and the challenge directly, or I'm afraid to make you angry, and so I won't engage. And then the other axis is the give a damn axis. Like, how much do I care about you? How much how much am I willing to lean in and let you know that I really care? And so on the one end of the spectrum, you care a lot. On the other end of the spectrum, you care less. This quadrant she calls ruinous empathy. So these are people who care personally, and they care a lot, but they're so afraid to challenge directly that they end up not helping you, and they end up hurting you because they end up telling you that everything's okay when it's not. And if you've ever had a boss where you worked with them every day, and then you find out like at an annual review that you've been messing up, then that's like a really good example of ruinous empathy, because they didn't take the time to challenge you in the moment and really help you in the moment. They waited until they were forced to by the system that you were all working under. This other quadrant she calls manipulative insecurity. I haven't worked with many people who like I genuinely think are in this where they're like they don't care, and they're genuinely choosing to challenge directly. But I'm sure those people are out there who are like they're like giving feedback in a way that like really throws people off in almost an intentional way. This quadrant is what she calls obnoxious aggression. So these are people who challenge directly, but they don't really care about what you think or how you feel. My experience has been that my natural tendency is on ruinous empathy. But when I'm tired, I come out as obnoxiously aggressive. And because I was just like, I don't care what you think. I'm just going to tell you exactly, my filter as I get tired just kind of goes away. So the goal is to get where you both care personally and challenge directly, and that's radical candor. And she has a few other rules when following radical candor, and it's to kind of really take not just care personally and not just challenge directly, but the time and place and how you go about doing so really matters. You want to make sure you're being humble and helpful, and like genuinely trying to help the other person. Do it immediately. Like, don't wait a year to give this feedback. Like, try to do it as close to the event where it happened. If you've got criticism, make sure you give that criticism privately. If it's praise, make sure you give that praise publicly, right? Like, not all radical candor has to be negative. Some radical candor can be a tool for being positive as well. And don't try to personalize the behavior. So don't try to make it like about the other person. You talk, again, this kind of goes back to what I've talked about earlier. Talk about the work, talk about the behavior, but it's not something that's wrong with them. It's something that's wrong, right? And so, and that's an important distinction that I touched on earlier. So, and I can't state that enough. And that was something that was first brought up to me from another software developer who I was working with, and it came out of me doing code reviews. And, they pointed out to me that whenever I was doing a code review, I was complaining, like I was writing statements of like, it looks like you don't know what you're doing here, or things like that, where when he was like, look, I feel like you're attacking me, please attack the work if you want to attack something, but don't attack me as an individual. And I really, really appreciate, I feel like that was him being radically candid in that moment. And I've really tried to keep that with me throughout my career. So next framework has to do with interruptions. And so I'm curious, before we dive into this, who hates being interrupted? Because I really hate being interrupted. Okay, good. So pretty much everybody. So the framework that we came up with to handle interruptions is, we call it inception interruptions. And the idea was kind of based on the movie Inception. And it was really born out of the number of times that Andrea would come up to me while I was like deep in thought, like deep into work. And she would say, hey, you got a second? And I'd be like, I do now. And she like was genuinely frustrated, because in the world that she worked in, like that was a very polite way to interrupt someone. That was like, and like no was always an acceptable answer. And so, this is one where we use the listen, validate framework, the listen, verify, validate framework to really kind of dig into. And it was through that I learned that Andrea like genuinely meant, do you have a second? And I could have said no. But what I really needed, but the big aha for her was me saying that like, well, I was like seven dreams down. And you asking me if I've got a second popped me out of all of them. And the amount of time it's going to take me to get back down there is just like huge. Like the number of mental models as a software developer that I often have to keep in my head, like the number of things that like I have to keep track of, like what the computer's doing in this context, and what the data is supposed to look like. And it's just it's really, really hard. And like I'm coding and I'm solving a problem, and I've got to keep all these details in my head at once. And then when somebody asks me even a simple yes or no question, do you got a second? It just makes all of it disappear, because the question that I have to answer isn't just, do I have a second? It's, does Andrea really mean a second? She never means just a second. It's always more than just a second. Like read body language. Is this important? Is it not important? That's something that I have to try to decide. It's not something that was communicated. Like, I've got something really important I need to talk to you about. That wasn't what was asked. It was, you got a second? So I don't know if this is trivial and it's polite for me to blow it off. I don't know if it's really important and I should tell her that I need to take it. So those were kind of all the complexities that we noticed. So then we started wondering, like, well, what if we started to communicate how far down I was? So if I were able to, so instead of her asking me, do you got a second? If she asked me inception level, and I could tell her a 7, because I could very quickly assess how far down I am. And that doesn't seem to burst my inception bubble quite the way that like answering, do you got a second is. And then that gives Andrea information, and she can think, okay, it's going to be really costly and really expensive to interrupt him right now. So I'm just going to tell him, let me know when you come up for air, and we'll chat. And then she walks away and I'm able to get back to work and it's no big deal. Or she's able to say, I'm sorry, this is going to suck, but it's really important. I have to interrupt you. And then I know that like I communicated her the cost of pulling me out of what I'm working on. And she was able to kind of weigh that as well. We also noticed that like for Andrea, kind of when she gets into kind of strategic thinking and she's like, imagine like what could happen over like a next 5-year period or something like that, she kind of goes the opposite direction. It's almost like she's like imagining different movies. So instead of like being within a dream, within a dream, within a dream, she's like imagining like concentric universes almost. And she's like seeing all these universes play out at once. And that's when she's trying to look at like all the different possible things that could happen. Which one do we want to happen? What decisions do we need to make to get there? And that's, you know, kind of her strategic thinking and her strategic focus really puts her there. And so if I ask her, you got a second, and she's like at this really big focus level, all of that falls apart for her. But I can ask her, you know, inception instead. And that's able, you know, then she's then able to break it out of that. We use this at Corgibytes all the time. We use it in Slack. So instead of just sending somebody a direct message to say, you got a second, or can you hop into a meeting real quick? Like we instead will ask inception ? And the number that we get back, it really informs whether or not we interrupt that someone. So like it's, you know, and it's probably one of the more transformative, you know, techniques that has come out of us working together. And this was what I really like about this framework is we discovered this because we were using the listen, verify, validate framework. Like this is something we probably wouldn't have discovered had we not leaned in to like why I was getting so angry whenever she would ask me if I got a second. So, so that's coming up on the end. If there's anything, if you get nothing else out of this talk, kind of the idea that I want you to walk away with is that communication is a skill. It's a skill that you can learn. And if it's one that I can learn, you can learn it too. This is something that like early in my career, I was told that I don't communicate well. Early in my career, I was told that I shouldn't talk to customers. Early in my career, I was told that I shouldn't write. Early in my career, like, you know, I'm just an engineer. I should just, you know, just work on the code. I should only communicate with the code. I shouldn't even bother because I was doing it wrong. Instead, you know, working with Andrea has really helped me learn that communication is a skill that I can grow and I can learn from. Some other books for y'all's list. These are great resources if you wanted to dig in more about more ways to get curious about communication. Tung Fu is on here. Sam Horn is one of Andrea's mentors from way back. And for the software developers in your life, one thing I've heard Andrea say over and over again is, you know, software developers are always looking at adding new languages to their tool belt, to their tool stack. And in a very tongue-in-cheek way, you can tell them that perhaps they should add English to that. So, and help them level up and kind of use some of these frameworks to really kind of help them level up their skills in their tools, while also using these frameworks to really learn about the challenges that they have and the challenges they're experiencing in their world and what life is like for them. So if you'd like to get in touch to kind of carry the conversation forward, I can be reached here. Legacy Code Rocks is an online community that Corgibytes runs, where we focus on all the love about legacy code. We have a podcast there as well. So if legacy code is of interest to you or anyone in your life, send them that resource and it'll probably help them a lot. And I'm curious if y'all have any questions.
Well, thank you so much. I think this has been really helpful. I'm sure Isaiah would agree. We'll see if any questions come in. I do have one question because I didn't really get to talk to you before we did this presentation today. Can you tell us a little bit about Corgibytes and what you guys are working on?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. So Corgibytes, we focus on software systems that need to be maintained and improved. We don't build any new software systems from scratch. We take existing ones and we make them more stable, more scalable, and more secure through a process that we like to call software remodeling. And it's really kind of informed out of the way you might remodel a house or remodel a building or any other physical structure. And we segment software developers into two camps. There are makers. And those are people who like to build things from scratch and really get a lot of joy out of that. And there are menders, and menders really enjoy inheriting a project from somebody else and bringing it to a finish line and making improvements to it. And on a successful product team, you need both. When you need more of one, differs throughout the life cycle of the project. Early on in the product's life cycle, having a lot of maker energy is really useful. Menders will slow you down and they'll be frustrating. However, once you start to reach a little bit of maturity, you really want to have a lot of mender energy, and then you almost want the makers to get out of the way a little bit, or have them, really kind of focus their energy in places where it won't be disruptive. And so that's kind of our philosophy. And the idea is that we are a team of menders, and we're here to help your teams if you need it.
I think that's super interesting. Luke Rabin mentioned that a couple months ago. He was doing a presentation on startups, and he mentioned that exact thing where, like, at the beginning you need a lot of like build energy, build, and then eventually you have to realize that you're gonna have to scale your product, and the code that you wrote the first time around might not be the best at the end of the day. So I love that you guys are focusing on that area that I think a lot of people tend to forget about.
Yep.
So Isaiah just posted the survey. If you guys wouldn't mind filling it out, we really appreciate it. This helps us inform what presentations we're gonna do next. Isaiah, you got some questions coming in. You wanna take it over?
Yeah, let's see. So we got a question for you, Scott, and I think everyone here in the chat as well. Biggest communication challenge that you still face?
Ooh. I would say interruptions, like even though we do have the Inception framework, it's remembering to use it. Because I think like so many of us are like our knee-jerk reaction is to want an answer right now. And we're on a remote, we are a remote distributed team. We were before COVID made it cool. And what we've learned over the years is when you're remote, having asynchronous forms of communication are really important. And not assuming that somebody else is available, like when you need them, and instead trying to phrase your questions in a way that will allow them to respond when they're able. And so things like inception, and then if you don't get a response, say, ping me when you're available. And that can be helpful. And again, just like recognize that like the back and forth on that might take a couple hours, but it's the back and forth that was needed to be flexible for both of your lives, especially as like, one of you might have kids at home that you're trying to wrangle. You might hear kids in the background, over here. I've got working at home is something that I've been doing for ages. Working from home with little ones at home as well is a very different challenge. So recognizing that when you're communicating with team members is important.
Oh yeah, and it's definitely not a remote working world if we don't see a cat or a dog or hear something in the background. That's just gonna make the day more interesting. We got another question here too. Just for those of us that work with agile teams and going through the formal Scrum process at the end, there's the retrospective. Some may feel that that's the chance to air out communication challenges. What are your thoughts there?
That is a great place to do so. And if the communication challenge is to, if you're working within that framework and you kind of view the communication challenger as a blocker, like it's really keeping you from getting your task done, it's really keeping you from being effective, then I would say raise it as an impediment during your stand-up as well. And don't make it necessarily something that has to wait. And always, I think it's always a good idea, again, to kind of use the radical candor framework with the individual who you're having communication challenges with. If it's not, like, I'm assuming it's an individual communication challenge and not a systemic communication challenge. I guess if it was a systemic challenge, then the retrospective would be probably the best first place to bring it up, because you can get the whole team's perspective on why it is that way. But if it's a communication challenge with just a specific individual, really to try to talk with them privately about that first. And then if you feel like you're not getting the support that you need, or if it's a communication challenge that's felt across the team, it's not just something that you're feeling with maybe a particular individual, then the retrospective could be a good place to bring it up if you haven't gotten traction in other means as well.
It's really helpful. Yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, and I saw somebody mention the innovation delusion, and there's a copy right here. Add this to your list if you haven't. So
Add it to the list. Any other questions for Scott? Looking at the chat here.
This has been really, really awesome. Thank you, Scott. I hope it's okay that we quote you on LinkedIn, and I've got a few of these I'm taking back to the team tomorrow.
Please, yeah, please do. Like, yeah, I really appreciate you all having me. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the ramblings of you know, things I've learned by working with my spouse for the last 10 years. So.
Yes, awesome story, and we really appreciate your time, and everyone here on the call too. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch, and if there's ever anything you need from the ProductTank team, feel free to reach out. But see you next month.
Will do. Thank you. Thank you.